Dear Excellencies, dear speakers from all over Europe and Japan, dear Professor Söderberg, dear Professor Blechinger-Talcott, dear Professor Ström, distinguished guests and friends, it's my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Japanese-German Center Berlin to our virtual panel discussion titled EU-Japan Relations Beyond the Strategic Partnership Agreement. Well, when the agreement was signed almost 2 years ago, after many, many years of negotiations, it marked an important milestone for our relations, and it connected with great hopes. The treaty was not only designed as a free trade agreement, but also as a strategic economic partnership agreement. It should, above all, contribute to reducing non-tariff trade barriers, creating transparency, and thus also strengthening ties between small and medium-sized enterprises between our two economic regions. Today, we would like to discuss what has been achieved so far, and perhaps even more important will be the question of how the partnership agreement between Japan and the EU could help us to position ourselves in our future global economy. I mention this especially against the background of the fact that just a few days ago, in mid-November, a regional comprehensive economic partnership was signed between 15 countries in Asia-Pacific, including Japan. This RCEP created the world's largest free trade area and certainly is an important sign in the sense of multilateralism. But does this mean that Europe will be losing weight in our world order? And furthermore, I'm questioning myself how EU-Japanese relations might be affected by the recent political developments, let's say, in the US or in the UK. And are increased protectionist developments due to the current corona crisis also having a negative impact on our trade relations? I am pleased that these and many other questions will be examined from different angles today. Speaking for the Japanese side, we welcome Mr. Uemura from Mitsubishi Electric Corporation. The company is also chairing the Japanese side of the EU-Japan Business Roundtable. It's very great to have you here. Also zooming in from Tokyo is Dr. Klaus Vize from the German Embassy. Thank you also very much for joining. From Italy, Milano, we welcome Professor Berkowski from the University of Pavia. From the Netherlands, we welcome Dr. Okano Heymans from the Klingendahl Institute in The Hague. And from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, we welcome Professor Midford from Trondheim. We very much look forward to your statements. And I would also like to thank our cooperation partners from the European Japan Advanced Research Network, EJAN, namely Professor Söderberg and Professor Blechinger-Talcott. And as well as the moderator of today's panel discussion, Professor Ström, Deputy Director of the European Institute of Japanese Studies at the Stockholm School of Economics. And we also would like to thank the Toshiba International Foundation for their kind support. Last but not least, we thank you all for joining and thus contributing to strengthening our Japanese-German and Japanese EU network, which is already strong, but is of very great importance also in the future, certainly. We look forward to a fruitful discussion, and I look forward to the statements that will follow shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Münch. Next, I invite our cooperation partner, Professor Dr. Marie Söderberg, Chairperson of the EJAN Executive Committee and Director of the European Institute of Japanese Studies at the Stockholm School of Economics, for her words of welcome on behalf of the European Japan Advanced Research Network.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I thought I would start by explaining what EJAN is. This is actually a network-based organization which has been in existence for more than 12 years right now. It's a gathering of around 20 scholars from all over Europe. We have members in France, Italy, in Hungary, in Norway, in Denmark, in Sweden, in Finland, UK, everywhere. And we have, it's a gang of European specialists on Japan. So most of our members speak very good Japanese. We publish in peer-reviewed journals. We work on Japan, various aspects of Japanese economy, politics, and society. What we have in common is this interest of Europe-Japan relations, which we will discuss today. And we have followed this for the last 2 years, and every year had conferences on this topic. But since we have the strategic partnership agreement, I think we are getting closer to getting some cooperation going. Economic relations have always been very strong between Europe and Japan. But in this new normal, we also have the possibility of more political cooperation. And here I think actually EU and Japan have a lot of common. We have a lot of shared values. We are both for multilateralism. And if we want to stay on the world scene and have some impact, I think we need to cooperate. I will not say so much more, but I'd like to also thank the Japanese German Center in Berlin for hosting us. And hopefully we can come back in the beginning of the summer and have a conference live in Berlin, but at this stage we do it like this. I will also answer questions if there are any on development cooperation in the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marie. And now it is my pleasure to hand over the word to our another cooperation partner from the EON network, Professor Dr. Verena Blechinger-Talcott, Professor for Japanese Politics and Political Economy at Freie Universität Berlin, for her welcome address.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Holtgrün, and thank you very much to the Japanese-German Center Berlin for hosting us in this digital way. I am a member of the EJARN network that Marie Söderberg has just introduced earlier, and as that in the function as a member, I was actually supposed to host this year's conference on EU-Japan relations, and we were all excited about having the conference physically in Berlin, and then unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this turned out to be impossible. However, we decided to move the conference, to reschedule it to next summer, most likely in June, and then also because the topic that we are talking about is so important, EU-Japan relations, the strategic partnership agreement, and then also what we could see the development from a merely economic cooperation to a more and more political one that also includes security aspects, that includes strategic aspects, for example, connectivity issues. So in that way, we thought it's a very important, very timely issue that we want to bring to the attention of our members and also of the wider community interested in Japanese politics and EU-Japan relations. So we decided to host a digital panel this year in November. And while it first seemed to be kind of a something to make up for a lost opportunity, I'm now absolutely excited. We have almost 100 people who registered for this event. We have quite a high number of people here in the Zoom call. It will also be visible through the YouTube channel of the Japanese-German Center Berlin. So what seemed to be kind of a makeup for a lost opportunity has turned out to be a tremendous opportunity for networking and discussion. And just looking through the list of participants, I'm quite excited that we have colleagues from all over the world in this Zoom call today, and really also have experts on Japanese economy, Japanese politics, EU relations. We have former diplomats, we have business representatives, we have people from the think tank world. So in that way, I think this is a tremendous opportunity, and I'm very excited and looking forward to our discussion now. But before handing the floor back to Dr. Holtgrün, let me also say a few words of thank you. First of all, to eJORN to giving us the opportunity to host in Berlin, albeit just virtually for now, but then also to the Toshiba International Foundation for their tremendous support, and also for their support also for the conference that is still to be held. And then, of course, a very, very big word of thank you also to the Japanese-German Center Berlin for setting this up and hosting us digitally. So without any further ado, I'm very much looking forward to the discussion, and thank you all for joining our panel this morning. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for your introductory words. And now I am very happy to hand over to the chair and moderator of today's panel discussion, Professor Dr. Patrick Ström, Associate Professor and Deputy Director of the European Institute of Japanese Studies at the Stockholm School of Economics. Professor Ström, dear Patrick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me first begin with expressing gratitude to all our partners for setting this virtual panel up this morning and afternoon. And welcome to all our participants from different parts of the globe. So good morning to Europe and good afternoon or good evening to our Japanese participants. We have, as we heard, a very distinguished and high-level panel, and we look very much forward to the discussions today. When it comes to some practical details, I would like to encourage the audience to be active and ask questions. And when you do that, please use the raise your hand function in the Zoom. So when you raise your hand, I can call you out and you can unmute and you can ask your question. And please remember to be brief when asking your question. Hopefully we have a lot of questions, so we would like to accommodate as many of these questions for the discussion as possible. And I think what we heard so far is that we have the complementarity between the EPA and the SPA, which is really, really important and exciting for the future collaboration between Europe and Japan, but also the wider international standing of EU and Japan in connection to other world actors. So I think that's what we're going to hear from our distinguished panel this morning. And I would like to start by giving the floor to Professor Axel Berkowski from the University of Pavia. And you will have 7 minutes, Axel, and that is also for the rest of the participants. And I will be strict and fair in trying to keep the time. So without further ado, Axel, the screen is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Yeah, thank you very much, and good luck with being fair with me, that's for sure. But first of all, very, very briefly, I'm not going to waste my time thanking everybody individually, but German-Japanese Center, thank you very much. Verena from Berlin, thank you very much for making this possible. The colleagues at the German-Japanese Center, Sven and the other colleagues, very, well done. And Dr. Münch, of course, as the Secretary General of the Center, thank you very much for hosting this. And thank you also, Patrick, for chairing the first session. So I'll go straight into, and of course, hello, audience, especially my colleague from the University of Milan, Professor Corrado Molteni, a good friend of the network, and has been active also the network in the past. And very, very nice to see you, Corrado. And Corrado has got many friends here among the audience. So that's very good. And I see we have 73 people tuned in, which is really good. I really appreciate this. Okay, Japanese EU-Japan trade relations, 2019 and 20. So I'll start with the good news part. I start with how the EPA, the Economic Partnership Agreement, was able to increase bilateral trade of goods and services between Japan and the EU in the first year after it has been implemented. The EPA was implemented in February 2019, and in February 2020, so roughly a month before the crisis really broke out here in Europe, we saw an increase of EU exports to Japan by 6.6%. Okay, that's it's not spectacular, but it's significant to the same period the year before. This outperformed the growth in the past 3 years, which averaged 4.7%, which means that the actual increase through the EPA over the year is roughly 2%. So it's not 6.6, but 2%. Again, not yet the way it was announced to be, but still a significant increase. This, of course, is going to change this year due to the crisis and the crisis of trade flows and supply chains problems. So 2% increase. Japanese exports to Japan grew by 6.3%, so more or less the way it grew the other way around. And that's also roughly a 2% increase. So, roughly overall 2% increase of bilateral trade between 2019 and 2020. So that's the first result, the first actual result and real result, quantifiable result of the consequences of the EU-Japan EPA. Okay, and if you put this into, just to put some figures to it, roughly then trade of goods and services between the EU and Japan is roughly, or was roughly in 2019, 185 billion euro, more or less. Yeah, that's more or less what it is. It's for 2020, it's going to be different. It's going to be different. It's going to be lower, I suppose, but who knows? It's depending on how quickly trade was able to pick up and make up some of the lost ground it lost in the first part of the year. We'll see. And to put this into perspective, this is roughly, Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is roughly, I've checked on this very, very quickly, it's roughly the amount of bilateral trade between Taiwan and mainland China, right? That's more or less the same. Maybe there's some more trade between mainland China and Taiwan than there is between the EU and Japan, but that's more or less the comparison that would make sense, right? So, but again, it's there's still a lot of room, for improvement. If you also take into account that trade between mainland China and Taiwan, is roughly the same, right? And the EPA, of course, will be helping. In more details, if you look at EU exports to Japan in 2019, dairy exports by 10.4%. Just wine, mostly, I have to say, to my chagrin, not Italian wine, but mostly French wine. Although we, of course, know that Italian wine is far superior, to French wine. But still, the growth is 17.3%. Leather articles up by 14%. Electrical machinery exports, and that's Germany above all, I suppose, and also Italy, up by 16%. Okay. And the prospects for 2020 until the crisis broke out. Giborg is telling me, how dare you? She's from France. But, Giborg, just be realistic. The wine in Italy is fruitier, let's put it this way. So, there is, the prospects were even better before the outbreak of the crisis. And the goal was it, and still is, the goal is to remove all of the roughly 1 billion euros in duties that the EU and Japan have been imposing onto each other for many, many years. And we can report, or we can cheerfully report that most of the duties, roughly 95% of all duties, have been removed already. So when the EPA was implemented a year and a half ago, immediately, and that's, of course, that's the very nature of an economic partnership agreement, of a free trade agreement. More than 95% of all tariffs were removed. But again, it's another 5% or 3.5% to be removed, and this will take place in the years ahead. So if everything, when all is said and done, when everything is being removed, then the EU and Japan, at least in 2019, predicted that annual trade, bilateral trade in goods and services will be or could be increased by 36 billion. euros. So, and that would be, if you take the 185 billion bilateral trade figure, that would be 20% roughly. It would be, roughly 80, 180, 185 plus 36. That is 20%. That was the prediction. So if all goes to plan, of course it did not go to plan this year, but in the years ahead, if everything goes to plan, then we could see an increase in bilateral trade, not by 2% or 3%, but by 20%. This is what the statistics. The COVID-19 crisis with the significant but seeming collapse of world trade, EU trade, of course, included. Okay, when we with the European in 1920, trade will fully recover by 2022, in a year and a half, the earliest. That is probably to be taken with a lot of caution, because the bilateral trade and multilateral trade was really picking over July, August, September, and maybe, but who knows? That that remains to be seen. Of course, because we cannot look into the future. Maybe this will be earlier than 2022.
You're coming up to your 7 minutes, Axel.
Yeah, sure. I'll conclude here. So prospects are good. The responses, the initial responses, and this is where the EPA, and probably the last thing I will say, where the EPA became very, very handy and very, very useful. The EU and Japan, have provided us with evidence that they're not immune to protectionist policies. The first tariff easing, but very, very difficult in the case of EU and Japan, because we have the EPA, and the EPA does not allow that sort of measures. It was attempted, it was done, but the EPA, I think, as a legal and instrumental framework, made it very, very difficult, and will continue to make it difficult for the EU and Japan to resort to protectionist measures, right? And this is, of course, the way to go. But there were some attempts in the summer to do this in Japan, and of course among EU member states as well. But the EU, Japan, EPA, I think, did a very good job, and the EU Commission did a very good job making sure that these sort of protectionist measures would be limited to the very minimum. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you. Perfect, Axel. Thank you very much for that. And I think we have reasons to come back to the EPA. So now we move from EU trade issues to the EU cooperation on digital connectivity. And I think that relates very much to the future of the SPA. And to give us a presentation is Dr. Maike Okano-Heymans from the Klingendahl Institute in Den Haag, where she is working as a senior research fellow. So Maike, the screen is yours, please.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and to all the others for having me, and of course for our colleagues for hosting us. I'm really very happy that we're having this eJarn event, that we decided not to skip the COVID year, but still get together. And I think it's amazing. So after having 70 people online, I think it shows that it was really worth the effort. Even though I have to say, I'm very lucky that I didn't have to make much effort. So again, thank you for hosting this so perfectly. I would indeed like to highlight a bit of what has been happening in the connectivity field, because of course Japan and the EU signed a connectivity partnership in September 2018, a year after the EU came up with its own connectivity strategy, and a few years after Japan came up with its sustainable and quality infrastructure partnerships. So combining the two, this developed into this connectivity partnership. So a year later, I think it's really useful to look at what has been achieved so far. And to me, to give away my conclusion, I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag, because we've seen tangible steps, but at the same time, there's still a lot of work to be done. And in discussing this partnership, I'd like to focus a little bit on digital connectivity, because I think that is where really the future lies. Connectivity is about transport. We all know the roads and the railways. Much has been discussed. Human connectivity, exchanging more people and their thoughts, of course, but really digital is where the world is heading, because in this fourth industrial revolution, where ICT is really entering everything of our society, and well, COVID-19, of course, highlighted again how important digital is to our lives, how fundamental. But also how much freedom of online engagement, for example, is, and how we differ with certain actors in the world. So the digital field is really an important one for the future. Because of course the technological developments will only well, go faster in increasing and in changing our societies. So we really have to get to common action and to common regulation to deal with future challenges, or actually today's challenges that are already out here. And of course, the United States-China tech conflict is crucial to this. We both do not want to be play balls or play fields in this tech conflict between the two giants. So the EU and Japan have reason to cooperate here. I think developments that I would like to highlight, that where I do see that the EU and Japan have started to cooperate in the digital connectivity sphere. One is, again, related to COVID-19, because of course, at the beginning of this pandemic, it was clear that, well, partially because of the lack of freedom of speech online in China, the spread of the virus was so much faster than it might have been if people would have been allowed to speak out. So in that sense, the limitations on the freedom of speech in certain regions is clearly impacting on what is happening in our societies. But also the disinformation that came out and that was allowed to spread also through digital means. So I was very happy to see that in the last summit in May, the EU-Japan summit, both parties decided to cooperate on disinformation and to stop, to try to limit the spread of disinformation, particularly online, because of course with social media, the spread of disinformation can go so much faster than otherwise. So that's a really, I think, a tangible, success, at least in a new sort of field that is taking up to address. A second one that I would like to highlight is the Indo-Pacific. And of course, the Indo-Pacific, the EU was hesitant for many years to engage with this concept for different reasons that we can discuss later. But for the first time, the Indo-Pacific was mentioned in an official EU document in this EU-Japan partnership. So it was really then, I think that it was a success on the part of the Japanese to engage Europe with this concept. And we've seen most recently the Netherlands, my own country, come up with an Indo-Pacific guidelines. After, of course, Germany a few months ago already came up with this. And together with France and several other countries, we are there now pushing for more engagement also at the EU level. And I think if we get a digital turn, so to say, in this Indo-Pacific engagement of the EU with Japan, we can really make tangible steps with cooperation in the context of this connectivity partnership. In my remaining time, the little time that I have still, let me highlight three subsets where I think very relatively less has been done and where really big opportunities still lie ahead. One is the big tech platform regulation. Both the EU and Japan suffer from not having really big tech companies of the like of Google, Amazon from the United States, but also Alibaba, Tencent from China. So it's really the Chinese and the American companies that ruled this sector. And I think this is problematic in the sense that also it does not allow the EU and Japan to really regulate when they should. So to cooperate on becoming more innovative and commercializing some of the great innovations that are being developed, I think the EU and Japan can do better. And as an extension of that, also then regulate better. So the standard setting of digital norms is a second element where I've been in discussions on what the EU calls a human-centered approach, what Japan calls Society 5.0, and what the two have in mind, despite the differences in language, is really the idea to put people first. So whereas sometimes it's said of the United States that big tech goes first, of the Chinese that the state goes first, I think the EU and Japan share this approach to putting people first. And they've come very far. EU GDPR is, of course, an important one, and that has also led to legislative changes in many other countries, including in the Indo-Pacific. But I think the two can do more. And the final point, because I realize I'm running out of time here, the final point that I think I'd like to make is cooperation on digital ODA. I'm not sure if Wilhelm Vosse is present here with us, but I wrote a piece with him earlier this year on digital cooperation, where also I think the EU and Japan should cooperate in third countries. And that includes, of course, countries in the Indo-Pacific, but it includes also countries in Europe's own neighborhood, where the digital divide is broadening. So we have to make sure that we fight poverty also by looking at digital tools. They have also oftentimes, well, not really been recognized, I think, by European traditional donors, that digital tools can be very useful also to spur development, but it's also to make sure that, for example, cybersecurity is in place in specific third countries. Japan, of course, has been acting in Southeast Asian region already on this. I believe it is in Thailand that they have a cybersecurity center that tries to engage with ASEAN countries. And I think the EU and Japan would do well to cooperate further in this field. So I'll leave it to that because 7 minutes is up. Back to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Maike, for very good insights in this. So we move from the cooperation on connectivity and digital issues to the cooperation on energy issues, which is also a very important part, of course, within the sustainability aspect of the collaboration. And to give a short statement, we have with us Professor Dr. Paul Milford, who is a professor at the Department of Sociology and Political Science and director of the NTNU Japan program, joining us from Trondheim, Norway. Paul, the screen is yours, please.
Okay. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Patrick. And I want to start by thanking the German Center, the Japanese-German Center in Berlin and the Free University of Berlin for their excellent preparations, their very thorough and excellent preparations and sponsorship of this web seminar. And in this, I also want to just echo what Maike said, and that I'm really happy that we've been able to arrange this seminar as a partial, but nonetheless really valuable substitute for our annual meeting, and despite the kind of challenges we've had in 2020. So in this brief presentation, I'm going to make several points, 6 points in particular about EU partnership regarding energy and more broadly the environment and sustainability. Particularly, I'm going to focus on renewable energy and say something about electrification of transport and their key roles moving forward. Now, first, I want to emphasize, my first point is that the EU and Japan are the two global leaders in combating global climate change and promoting renewable energy. That's because they're two of the 4 leading economies in the world, and they're the two that I would argue have been most consistently committed to combating climate change. Second, the areas where the EU and Japan should deepen their bilateral cooperation, just to jump right into very specifics, include things such as smart grids, integrating national and regional grids through tie lines, greater usage of renewable energy, maintaining and enhancing their technological competitiveness in, for example, storage batteries, other storage technologies, battery-powered electric vehicles, and not least of all, promoting the hydrogen economy. These are areas where both sides have been learning from each other over the past couple of decades. Of course, Japan pioneered the development of photovoltaic solar panels in the 70s and 80s and then made them commercially viable. Europe has really been establishing a leadership role, particularly in terms of establishing regional grids that help to integrate greater amounts of solar and wind power and other renewable energy into the grid. And also in terms of developing regional energy markets like Nord Pool here in Scandinavia that are also very useful for integrating more and more renewable energy into the grid. My third point is that the EU and Japan have a leading role in partnering with the incoming Biden administration to try to coax the US fully back into the Paris Agreement, which might not be quite as easy as you might think, in that you will may have a US Senate that is not necessarily very enthusiastic about that idea. But try to coax the US fully back into the Paris Agreement, and also the promotion of renewable energy and electrification of transport. Those are other, again, areas where the U.S. participation is vital if the EU and Japan can fully engage the U.S. However, and also I would, my fourth point then is that the EU and Japan, I think, also have a vital role to play as bridges for promoting environmental and renewable energy cooperation between China and the United States. I think there is real possibility that's one area where I think the incoming Biden administration and China have a lot of room for cooperation, where they have similar views on the importance of combating climate change. And where there's a lot of room for cooperation that incidentally might spill over into other fields and might allow for some kind of détente between the US and China, so that we can have a more stable global security outlook. And also economic and trade outlook as well. However, in the longer term, this is my fifth point, there is no replacement for EU-Japan partnership on the environment and energy, as the US is not necessarily going to be committed to combating climate change over the longer run. Sadly, I have to say, as an American, it seems to me that the U.S. political system has fallen into what seems to be a kind of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of system of extreme, or one might even say kind of schizophrenic political swings between left and right. So it's quite conceivable, sadly, that by 2025, the U.S. might again have an administration that is in climate denial again. So we can't necessarily count on the U.S. being back in the Paris Agreement and as an ally in fighting climate over the long run, much as we might want to. That leads to my sixth and final point, which is that the EU and Japan need to cooperate with each other to effectively cooperate with China, to engage China as well. But at this, even while cooperating with China, the EU and Japan also need to recognize that they have to compete with China as well. China has emerged quite bluntly as the leader in most environmentally friendly technologies today, starting with solar panels, where they control like over 60% of the market. The only one exception to that is hydrogen. Japan has really emerged as a hydrogen leader. The EU can learn a lot from Japan. Japan has a national hydrogen strategy. I recommend the EU also develop its own hydrogen strategy, and that the two establish a hydrogen council and cooperate bilaterally on that. But in terms of China's leadership, this is especially proved to be true now in battery-powered electric vehicles, where China's market is now larger than the rest of the world combined. And we are now beginning to see a large wave of battery-powered electric vehicles from China sweeping over the European market this year and next. Now, and a related technology are grid storage batteries that are key for expanding the use of wind and solar power. Now, China's achievement in environmentally friendly technology and commercialization of those technologies, to be sure, that's a real benefit for the global environment that we should all welcome. But Europe and Japan also need to cooperate with each other to maintain their competitiveness and technical autonomy in these areas, and also in broader industries like the automobile industry, just as they need to cooperate to maintain the digital economy, as Maike was talking about, from China, and also reclaim their digital autonomy from the United States. And with that, I will end my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Paul, for very insightful comments. I'm very sure we'll continue the discussion. So let us now move to the business perspective, where we look at EU-Japan trade and SPA agreements. And to join us, we have Uemura-san Noritsugu, who is a corporate executive for government affairs and external relations of Mitsubishi Electric Corporation, joining us all the way from Tokyo. Please, the screen is yours.
Thank you for introduction of myself. I am Uemura from work for Mitsubishi Electric, and also I am performing a main chair of the co-chair company of the EU-Japan Business Roundtable. And already 3 speakers spoke about the issue of Japan and EU cooperation from the perspective of trade, digitalization, energy, connectivity. So from my side, I would like to report about what kind of things we discussed at the Business Roundtable. We had the annual meeting earlier this month. So first, I would like to point out that EU-Japan relations are not something new like started yesterday, but have already had a long history and a firm basis. For example, Mitsubishi Electric, our company, was founded in Japan in 1921 and expanded into Europe in 1969. At present, we have established our own sales companies for air conditioning systems, automotive equipment, and factory automation products, etc. in 21 European countries, including Germany, and operate 9 factories as well. We have 50 years history in Europe, and many Japanese companies are nearly the same. About 1.5 years have passed since the EU-Japan EPA came into force, and the trade volume between the EU and Japan has mutually increased by about 6%, according to the last year's data. The utilization rate of preferential tariffs on both sides has exceeded 50%. The recent trade between the EU and Japan has been relatively stable despite the negative impact of the COVID-19 in the first half of this year. Well, thanks to the solid foundation of the EPA. With such a long history and a solid foundation, EU-Japan relations have completed phase 1 and have now entered into the phase 2, the stage for the deeper relationship. The challenge is for SME to more easily use the EPA. The BRT will also work with JETRO and the EU-Japan Industrial Cooperation Center to develop SMEs understanding how to use EPA. Secondly, I'd like to address the areas in which EU-Japan cooperation should be deepened. As mentioned by various previous speakers, the government and the business sector, both in EU and Japan, now exactly focus on green and digital. With regard to green, the EU is leading the world in its Green Deal initiative. In Japan, Prime Minister Suga announced a climate neutral declaration by 2050. Also, the latecomer, Japan's entry into the same stage as the EU is expected to accelerate cooperation between both sides. At the annual meeting of the BRT, for example, cooperation between EU and Japanese companies in the plastic recycling business and the clean hydrogen project were introduced. Activities to realize a circular economy and decarbonize society have already started. In particular, climate neutral by 2050 cannot be achieved by extending the existing technology, but requires innovative technologies. In this context, it is important for the EU and Japan to cooperate from the R&D stage and strengthen activities in innovation. The next is digital. With COVID-19 pandemic, the lifestyle of people is rapidly shifting to the digital, so-called digital transformation, such as spreading e-commerce, teleworking, and online lessons. As a result, business world is facing many challenges. For example, the realization of non or less contact, remote, decentralized industrial social structure. In order to solve these problems quickly and efficiently, each company is rushing to introduce and utilize digital technologies such as IoT and AI. In particular, business sector is paying much attention to data utilization as the key to digital transformation acceleration. The EU has GDPR for personal data, and Japan has the Act on the Protection of Personal Information, so-called APPI. In February last year, the EU adopted its adequacy decision on Japan, helping to facilitate data transfers. There is now a growing momentum to encourage the distribution and utilization of the industrial data in order to facilitate innovation. So far, those data have not been much used. In the EU, large-scale government initiatives such as Gaia-X and the Common European Data Space are steadily moving forward, focusing on data-driven innovation. Japanese government is also playing a role in promoting data free flow with trust, so-called DFFT, and is heading exactly in the same direction as the EU. It is said that the area of competition and area of cooperation should be classified in corporate strategy, sharing a common sense of values. The EU and Japan can make data sharing and utilization as an area of cooperation across companies, countries, and regions. By doing so, it could be possible for both and the EU and Japan to compete with the United States and China in terms of data volume. The third, in relation to the theme of this conference, I'd like to touch upon the strategic relationship between the EU and Japan. As COVID-19 has accelerated the changing speed of the society, the strategic collaboration with strong partners has become more important for the business sectors. Strategic collaboration, typically between companies, has recently become more prominent in the form of consortiums and alliances. For example, in the field of factory automation in Japan, there is a movement to form a platform for FAIT equipment at edge layer, which is close to the user side. That is Edge Cross Consortium, established in 2017, in which Mitsubishi Electric is a co-member. Edge Cross has been endorsed by a number of companies, including Siemens AG and Schaeffler AG of Germany, and now has around 400 members globally. Edge Cross is a technology platform for the FA, but I personally believe it is also a platform for strengthening strategic relationship in business sector. Another example is establishment of the Clean Hydrogen Alliance of the EU this July. At the BRT meeting, European Commissioner Mr. Breton called on Japanese companies to join the Hydrogen Alliance, to which the EU put much importance as a new energy source. The alliance has more than 700 members, including several Japanese companies, and I hope it will become a platform for strengthening the EU and Japan strategic relationship. So, how should we engage in strategic collaboration? The EU-Japan BRT is looking at the two schemes. One is regulatory cooperation, and the other is third country investment cooperation, so-called connectivities. So more details will be provided later in the Q&A session. So please allow me to conclude my first remarks here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uemura-san, for your comments. And now we switch from the business side to the diplomatic side, and to join us to talk about the SPA and the Indo-Pacific dimension is Dr. Klaus Witze, Minister and Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany to Japan. So Dr. Witze, the floor for the screen is yours.
Thank you, Professor Ström, and thanks to all colleagues of the Japanese-German Center, and allow me to greet my many old friends I discovered on these screens here. When Germany published its Indo-Pacific guidelines this September, we were kind of overwhelmed by the very positive reaction from the Japanese side. I think it's the same experience our colleague from the Netherlands explained about. And if you compare this to the reception of the SPA in the beginning, which was really not enthusiastic, it was a kind of a stepchild of the EPA, then you see a considerable change in the Japanese attitude towards the political dimension of the EU on the political importance of the EU for Japan. Especially today, so the increasing rivalry between the US and China doesn't leave us an option. Decoupling from China is not an option for anybody. We all need workable solutions and therefore more dialogue, especially among important players like the EU and Japan. We both have a very strong presence in the region, but we can certainly do more, coordinate better, and also we should strive to become more visible with our efforts. We all hope that under the new Biden administration, first the EU will play a more constructive role in the region, but we also hope that this will open more political space for the Japanese side for a more active support for the multilateral systems and for more cooperation with European partners. That will make our cooperation much easier. For Japan, it's interesting to figure out which role the EU can play in foreign security policy in the Indo-Pacific. The EU and the European member countries have always promoted the rule of law in international relations, freedom of navigation, sustainable development strategies, and we have also tried to contribute to peace and stability, especially also in the Indo-Pacific. The SPA has already become the basis for enhanced consultations between the EU and Japan. I think most of the more high-level results you will only see starting from next year because of the COVID situation, but the formats have clearly been enhanced and are on a different level now. Japan is looking for an increased maritime presence of EU member countries in the IPR. But the SPA has also opened the door this year for the first joint naval exercise between an EU mission, that is Atalanta, and Japan. The first joint naval exercise in the Gulf of Aden and the port call in Djibouti were first major steps in this direction. To cooperate with Japan in the Indo-Pacific region, I do think we need a country-by-country approach. Japan's strategy in the Indo-Pacific follows the paradigm that where the EU, the US or Europe reduces its engagement, China will always be there. And Japan seems to be convinced that in order to provide alternatives, you simply have to engage. Therefore, Japan has, for instance, been ready to increase its engagement in Myanmar, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, at a time when the EU or certain EU member states have been more reluctant to do so, certainly by good reasons. So because of this different approach for the EU and Japan, a country-by-country dialogue is absolutely necessary. And this dialogue has already significantly increased under the SPA framework. So Germany, for instance, supports the EU project Enhanced Security in and with Asia, a series of EU-Japan 1.5 dialogue meetings in Asian countries starting in 2021, which is clearly going into this direction. On connectivity, the EU became the basis, the SPA became the basis for the EU-Japan connectivity agreement, but this was only signed by Juncker and Abe in 2019. We look to Japan also because the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy has been quite successful under the Abe administration, and Japan has clearly strengthened its position as one of the most important partners for trade and investment in many of the larger ASEAN countries. Especially at a time when the Belt and Road Initiative is facing considerable obstacles, The Japanese strategy for investment in quality infrastructure is a very welcome addition, and sometimes also already an alternative for many countries along the Belt and Road. In the framework of the EU-Japan Connectivity Agreement, the EU has already set up considerable funds to develop joint projects with Japan, and is now in the process to establish the first flagship projects in third countries. But knowing the EU, then the time from 2019 until today has been relatively short, and we should give them some time also to come out of the COVID situation. I think that this kind of connectivity discussions will also give additional momentum to the country-by-country dialogue mechanisms that will provide some fuel, if you want to call it this way. As some of the speakers before me, I see large opportunities on the new security issues. The SPA already mentions fields for cooperation like energy security, climate change, cybersecurity, where Japan is actively looking for cooperation with the EU and EU member states. The corona crisis added medical security to this short list of new socio-economic security problems. The consultations within the WHO framework and the cooperation on COVAX between the EU and Japan have already been enhanced.
Dr. Witte, you're coming close to your 7 minutes, I'm afraid.
We also see with interest that the new Minister for Ecological Affairs here, Mr. Koizumi, has an initiative for green recovery after COVID-19. And I think Japan's joining of the International Platform on Sustainable Finance clearly points into the direction of more cooperation with the EU in this field as well. Well, I just wanted to point out a few positive things about the SPA, and I hope I managed to do so. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Witte, for your very clarifying input on this. So now it's time to use the rest of the time that we have for discussions, and I encourage our audience to use the raise hand function, and we will distribute the questions to the specific panelists or to the entire panel. I already have one question which is related to trade. So maybe Axel could start, but I think it also connects very well to the rest of the panel. And that is from Clementina Cardoso, who asked, what is the predominant role of trade in nurturing and maintaining cooperative political and societal relations between the EU and Japan and the wider Asian region? So as a trade as a facilitator, I presume. So Axel, would you have a go on that for the first?
Yeah. If I may, there was another question that was directed on trade also, if I may. A bit more. The other one is good too. I'll come to this very quickly. But a colleague asked, because I mentioned in my talk trade restrictions and protectionism, in the EU and Japan, and very, very briefly, and it's a good question because I did mention this. It's export subsidies essentially during the crisis. It's export restrictions, other subsidies, plus, and this was a big issue in Japan, at least in mid-2020, reshoring. Relocating production away from out of Japan into Japan, financed by the Japanese government, co-financed. And this was certainly not directly related to EU-Japan, to the EU-Japan EPA, but it's an issue that was very vividly discussed and also criticized inside of Japan and outside of Japan. So reshoring as a protectionist measure, if you will, financed by the government. This is what was taking place mid-2020. Whether it will go on and whether the government, will remain committed to doing this remains to be seen. But this was probably a warning shot as to what can happen when a crisis like this breaks out. Patrick.
Yep.
That's the subsidies. And
Okay.
the other one, or shall we pass it on?
It's trade as a facilitator for nurturing relations between the EU and Japan.
Yeah, no, I've seen the questions. Yeah, sure. What can I say? I mean, it's a very wide-ranging question. Sure, trade and economic interdependence always is also facilitating people-to-people exchanges. And certainly, if you have countries like Japan and China trading with each other, they don't go to war with each other. I mean, it's a very wide-ranging answer to a very wide-ranging question. But yeah, it is a facilitator of economic interdependence, is an obstacle to military conflict, if you want to put it this way.
Is there anybody else of the panel who wants to comment on the trade as a facilitator? Or if it's not, we should move to the next question, and that is Professor Verena Bleichinger, Talcott.
Hey. Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to ask a question. Thank you very much to the panel for the inspiring inputs. I wonder, if we have, now that we're looking back at the time of the SPA, that it has started, we heard both, I think, in Uemura-san's input and also in Dr. Fietz's input, that there has been an increase in consultations. And that is something I would like to hear a little bit more about from the panelists. So there's always one to conclude a contract and to write a partnership agreement, but the other thing is how to put it to work and how to make it a living structure. So in that way, I would like to hear what kind of effects you see in your area, and that's something maybe to everyone on the panel. What kind of effects you see in your area of the SPA? Has there been an increase in activity? And if so, in which way do we see the EU and Japan coming closer together? And then on the other hand, what I found highly interesting that also came in several of the inputs, how do we look at, on the one hand, EU-Japan cooperation, and on the other hand, bilateral country cooperation? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Uemura, maybe if you would like to comment on the question from Professor Bleichinger. What companies see as a...
Yes. So could you repeat again the question?
Yeah, the question was, since the EPA was concluded, do you see an increase in meetings, in activities between the Japanese side and the European side? You talked about the business roundtable that has been meeting. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about in which way the EPA and the Strategic Partnership Agreement have affected your cooperations with European counterparts.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I already reported in my initial speech, the trade volume itself has been increased at both sides, and also I mentioned about our relation has already completed the phase 1, and we are now entering into the phase 2, so deepening the relationship. In this sense, also in the BRT, we discuss about digital climate issue, basically the green and digital. We have a lot of possibility and a potential to cooperate with each other. So I also mentioned about the EU and Japan. Now we have on the same stage of green. So that in order to solve so many various challenges in the green issue, digital technology is key to find out the solution. So in this sense, also from the R&D stage, the Japan and the EU can cooperate. For example, in the SPA, so the science, technology, innovation is also the one of the topic in the SPA, and EU's Horizon Europe and Japan's moonshot innovation program. These are the kind of the the target for the cooperation between these two countries, so that even in the innovation, so the Japan EU can cooperate from now on and deepen the relation, tighten the relation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else from the panel who wants to comment on that issue? I have another comment or question regarding the potential of creating a digital market from Maike. And I think that relates also to the discussions with the SPA agreement. Dr. Witze, do you have any comments on the potential of creating a digital market or between the Japan and wider Asia European context?
Not so much on the digital agenda, but I mean, I have a list in front of me of all the political dialogues which took place even during the COVID situation and of the plans for next year. And it's more than an impression that this is clearly an enhanced effort by both sides, and a new participation of the EU by the Japanese side as an important player is absolutely visible. I mean, Japan has also understood that the ways of funding for certain projects goes through the EU, and that there are more options if you are in direct contact with them. Yeah, and to avoid reading the list to you all, I would just stop with this impression of mine.
Okay, thank you. We have another question coming in, or somebody wanted to comment? We had another question coming in from the audience on the digital ODA that was mentioned by Maike. If you could elaborate more on the digital ODA concept.
Sure, yes. Well, I think digital ODA is basically it's support for third countries on digital infrastructure, on digital competence, because of course it's not just about digital skills, you know, having a computer, but it's also about knowing what you're giving to a company or to a state when you start using certain applications. So that's digital competence. And it's also about developing an e-economy. And about regulation of the e-economy. So there's which relates to cybersecurity and resilience. So there's really many different elements that come with digital ODA, and I think it's basically your traditional ODA, but taking that to the digital field. And as we all know, I think many of the European donors in the development assistance field, they've been traditionally steered to poverty reduction, not so much to developing economies, but in this new environment where the digital economy is everywhere in society. On the one hand, this provides many opportunities. For example, in India, I think there's a great initiative of finance, using all digital tools to help bring financial support, for example, to women in that are pregnant in rural areas where otherwise they could not be delivered funds or medical support. So it really helps in many ways to also to alleviate poverty. But it also, I think, is a field where in Europe, because we have such developed societies, because our, medical, the health facilities are so well developed, where our economies are still relatively more traditional. So we have other developing countries leapfrogging us in a sense with the digital economy. So there's many opportunities, I think, of the digital for development agenda that also we do not grasp. So we have to cooperate in third countries with third countries. And for example, also empowering India to share its experience with other countries in the world, because India, as I said, in this development field, digital for finance, They are very well developed domestically. They have some great initiatives, but they do not yet have the capacity to take that to third countries. So here's an opportunity for what we call in tradition in the digital or in the ODA field, I think, third country cooperation, where, well, basically, for example, in this case, Japan and the EU could help India to go to in Bangladesh or to African countries to help deliver these benefits to people. And in doing so, we can also engage with the people there on the conditions, basically, of what internet do you want? Do you want an open and transparent and free internet, or will you allow certain governments to take more control? And I think that's also a very important discussion having with these countries.
Thank you very much, Maike. Going back to the issue of sustainability and directing more towards what you were talking about, Paul. Where do you see the future collaboration lie between Japan and EU countries in terms of energy, in terms of sustainability issues? Will there be co-opetition, or will we see more of cooperation in certain areas, in power generation and other aspects?
Thank you for that question. I think there's more potential for cooperation than there is for competition, although of course there will obviously be elements of competition too. Again, partly because the EU and Japan are kind of situated between these two superpowers, the United States and China. And again, particularly in terms of technology, the EU and Japan will need to cooperate to kind of maintain their competitive edge, particularly vis-a-vis China, which is now really the global leader in, again, areas like battery storage, which is really what's powering a very potential for great expansion of use of wind, expanded use of wind and solar. But again, one area where Japan remains the technological leader and where the EU can learn from Japan is in terms of hydrogen. The hydrogen economy, the Abe administration has launched a national hydrogen strategy. They're beginning to produce, they built a very large hydrogen manufacturing facility in Fukushima Prefecture that will make so-called green hydrogen, hydrogen produced from solar power and wind power, not from, say, coal, which is where the hydrogen from Australia is coming from. And of course, you can do carbon sequestration of that, but still, that's not as environmentally friendly. So hydrogen is a key area for cooperation. Also, we've been talking about digitalization. Smart grids are the digitalization part of energy policy, in the sense that, you know, you've always had to have a flexible management of electricity because demand is always changing, but now you have demand and supply changing together, and you need smart grids that allow for managing demand as well as supply and quickly reallocating resources. So that's an area where both the EU and Japan can learn from each other. Japan can learn from the EU in terms of how to integrate large national grids and also some aspects of rollout of smart grids. Japan, on the other hand, has been a leader in terms of smart grid technology with, in some recent years, almost half of new patents for smart grid technology coming from Japan. So those, I think, are some of the key areas where the two can cooperate. But I think it's more going to be cooperation rather than competition. But more generally, just finally, I think there is more there's also, of course, vast room for cooperation with the U.S., although again, the staying power of the U.S. as a partner is, I think, something we have to keep in mind, and also with China, which basically shares an interest in and I think a commitment in terms of fighting climate change, but they are also, as I say, they have the potential to be overwhelmingly dominant if we're not careful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have two raised hands at the moment, and I would suggest that we take these two questions and then we see for whom or if the entire panel wants to react. So the first person that I would like to invite is Leonard Göröj, if I pronounce the name right. Please ask your question.
Göröj, thank you. It is for Mr. Mitford. Thank you for your input. I would like to ask a follow-up question. We have heard before in other talks that the EU and Japan follow a human-centered approach, and from another input that we can expect the decentralization in the nature of work and social organization following the current crisis. So I would like to know, how much can we expect the green revolution to be decentralized itself in terms of technology, infrastructure, and energy production as a whole? Thank you.
That is a great question and something I didn't really have a chance to talk about. One part of smart grids and renewable energy is also a decentralization of electricity production. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Away from.
Can I take one more question?
Oh, sorry. Excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah. So Marie Söderberg, please, could you pose your question to the audience? Or
yeah, I just wanted to connect to Verena and Maike concerning what is being done in the strategic partnership agreement. And I want to point out that there is a facility in Tokyo from the European side working on this, and they put together teams already to go to the Central Asia, Africa, and Eastern Europe, Balkan, to go Japanese and European teams together and talk with the people there and see what is needed. I mean, we need to ask the countries also what is needed. And we'll create projects after those visits. They have been postponed due to COVID-19, but I'm sure that they will take place and we will get some concrete cases where we can see cooperation. I think that would be very important.
Thank you very much. So, Paul, now the screen is yours, and we go back to Marie's question.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry to have jumped the gun there. So as I was saying, that's an excellent question. An important part of the spread of renewable energy is this shift from centralization of generation from large fossil fuel plants or nuclear power plants, where you have these large centralized facilities and then grids going out regionally or nationally, to much more decentralized and even local grids. And this is good for the environment. It's also a way to deal with climate change, and particularly natural disasters and things such as typhoons that Japan has a lot of, because when you have one big national grid, when you have an earthquake like you did in March 11th, 2011, the whole system goes down. Even areas that produce their own solar or wind electricity in 2011 had no electricity because they were connected to the central grid. So the Abe administration, which is not known as having been a big fan of renewable energy, started in the last year to really promote renewable energy and local grids as a form of resilience towards natural disasters. This is in particular response to a typhoon in just east of Tokyo last year, where the grid went down and was down for many weeks. And again, this was a centralized grid. And since that time, there's been a real move in Japan towards promoting rooftop solar and batteries for homes, and also localized networks that are will not fall like a cascade of dominoes when something goes wrong in one part of the system. So decentralization of electricity production and distribution, I think, is a major trend we're going to see moving forward, and an area again where Japan and the EU can cooperate. I think Japan is probably getting out a little bit ahead of the EU in terms of looking at decentralization as a way to deal with natural disasters, partly because Japan has a lot of them. But I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Anyone in the panel that wants to take up the question from Marie on the SPA and moving forward and different parts of that in a post-COVID world? Dr. Witte, please.
Yeah, 2 points. I mean, the project Ms. Söderberg mentioned, that's the one I also mentioned, the enhancing security in and with Asia, and Germany supports this also on a bilateral basis. We put quite some funds into this, because it's really important to have this country-by-country approach and also listen to the countries concerned. And I'm really hopeful that this new approach will give a new dimension, especially because it's led by the EU for dealing with the countries in the Asia-Pacific region and in Africa. And then on the question of digital ODA, this has also a geopolitical side. Yeah, you have the great efforts of Japan to build data networks, undersea cables in the Pacific regions, clearly to provide also alternatives to other players in this field. And these are just ideas which are open, where we can think together with the Japanese what you can do. And I wanted to point out that next March, the European Union will join Japan and the United States for the first time in hosting cybersecurity training for the Indo-Pacific region, also as an outcome or on the basis of the SPA. So also in those fields there are many specific issues where the cooperation has been enhanced. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I had some trouble here.
May I respond to that? If it seems that perhaps our Patrick is not with us, but if I may then respond to this, because indeed the SCIVA project that you mentioned, Mr. Fietze, I think that's an excellent example of how particularly Germany, but also France, of course, with the EU, is trying to deepen the country-to-country cooperation. At the same time, from my little understanding of it, what I would love to see more here is cooperation also on the non-traditional security elements. It seems that, of course, also non-traditional security is on the agenda there, but it seems to be focused mostly towards, for example, terrorism issues, whereas I do think cybersecurity is an especially promising field where the Japanese side, in my view, is wanting to really cooperate with the EU. So it's really a pity if the sort of the outlines of the project of SCIVA do not allow for that. This is where I see sometimes the bureaucratic structures intervening with the real potential or the real need for cooperation. And perhaps allow me also, I'm not sure, but I think that the instrument that Marie was mentioning is a different one. It's not the Security in and with Asia project, but it's a partnership instrument that tries to facilitate more discussion between Japan and the EU, which I believe is a different set of issues. So I think we have two examples here of how the EU in recent years has been really trying to deepen dialogue with Japan. And perhaps a final point, I saw a question on South Korea and the potential to cooperate with South Korea. Yes, indeed, I did not specifically mention South Korea. I do think in the field that I address, digital, there's great opportunities. Of course, South Korea is also very enhanced. I consider this to be part of the Indo-Pacific sort of effort where we see cooperation, not just bilaterally, but also with countries, also Singapore, which has a very different approach than European countries to the digital, many digital things. But it's also extremely knowledgeable and has some, I think, best practices that we in Europe should learn from. And the same, again, should be said, of course, of South Korea. But we didn't have time to mention specific individual countries in much detail. Hence, I didn't mention it.
Yeah.
Hopefully, Patrick is back now.
Okay.
No, not yet. So I think I will just take the liberty to jump in because we have 8 minutes left. And in that way, it may be good to go around the panel one more time for a final statement. Maybe something that you didn't have a chance to address during the Q&A that you would like to bring in. Maybe also, if you feel, give us some impressions of issues that may very well be worth discussing in more detail next year when we have a real conference, because indeed a lot of the issues that you brought up just in the discussion in the Q&A sound really fascinating and would very well deserve being discussed in more detail. And I see from Sven Traszewski that Patrick has just returned. So in that way, I will definitely not kind of monopolize the space any longer. Patrick, I just did a transition towards the final statement, but maybe you want to introduce that. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. No, I think we were coming up to the end, and we had a lot of interesting discussions. So I think that we should do a quick round for the panel to have some final, very short remarks, and after that we will hand over to Dr. Holtgren again. So should we start with Dr. Witte? Any final remarks?
Yes, maybe a kind of a personal approach to all this, because what I would like to see more that the EU and Japan cooperate more on the structures in the region, on ASEAN and on the Pacific Island Forum. We both have our long-standing cooperation mechanisms, but they are in parallel. Yeah, and we both have our fora where we don't even invite each other. So, I mean, there is clearly a space for more cooperation, and I bring this up in all kinds of fora, but I hope we can do more. Yeah, and I'm really envious of the ASEAN Center here in Tokyo. I think we should have something like this in Brussels as well. Yeah, so the Japanese kind of pay for a lobbying institution for ASEAN to bring all the issues of ASEAN here in the political consciousness of this country. I like this idea very much. So that's my last remark. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then we switch to Uemura-san. Any final remarks and comments?
Okay, so I just would like to mention about RCEP. So as you know, the RCEP was agreed. And in this sense, since Japan is a partner of the EU through the EPA, SPA, so even though the EU is not the member of the RCEP, but if the EU will support or participate in the project the Japan is working on through the RCEP, so the EU indirectly participate in the RCEP, there's the possibility, so that it could be interesting for us to consider such kind of cooperation between the EU and Japan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Paul, any final comments?
Not too much. I guess I would just kind of re-emphasize one of the things I said just a moment ago, which is in terms of a topic next year, I think, more generally, I think disaster resilience is an important topic between the EU and Japan. I mean, at the military level, in terms of joint military exercises for disaster relief, Japan does that already with Asian partners through the ARF, through something called the Asia Index exercises. That should happen bilaterally, but also, again, in terms of renewable energy as a more disaster resistant type of technology. Also, we talked about sustainable connectivity between Japan and the EU, and particularly countries in between, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. There also, I think, ODA and cooperation related to promoting renewable energy in third countries. Also, again, the important infrastructure that goes along with that, smart grids, storage batteries, other forms of storage. Those are also areas where I think we should highlight opportunities for future cooperation. I'll leave it there. Thank you again for organizing this today.
We also had a comment from the audience that we do not touch or haven't talked about the combination of the relation between EU, Japan, and Korea, where Korea comes in both in terms of security aspects and the economic point of view. And I think that's something that we could possibly take with us for the future, and particularly now with the comments of Uemura-san with the RCEP and how that would connect to global and regional production networks. So, Maike, any final comments from your side?
Yes, thank you. I guess I want to relate to what Mr. Uemura just said on RCEP. I do think indeed that in the EU, some people have been calling this trade policy light and dismissing it as if it's not very important. I think it is indeed very important to notice how this agreement also binds countries in the region to China. So it shows how they are not wanting to pick sides again. and to engage with China continuously. And the EU is taking a similar approach. So I think we should engage with this, and ideally actually help to take this up to higher standards. China has, of course, indicated that it now also wants to join CPTPP. Well, let's see if they can stick to achieve that standard. But specifically on e-commerce, I think this chapter, which also, as I mentioned in the chat, mentions a ban on data localization, which is something I think that the EU is also supportive of. So we have to recognize the small steps that are being taken in a way that meets EU interests on regulatory cooperation. I think we would do well to engage more there.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Axel, you have 30 seconds. I know it might be difficult, but you can do it.
Of course, I'll do it very quickly. Yeah, just taking up. I mean, Mike replied to this already. Maybe it's easier if you talk about digital, cooperation. But if tempting, Takeda-san's question from the audience, to turn a bilateral, very complicated, very complex and bureaucratic relationship into a trilateral one. I think I don't want to spoil the party, but I think it's very difficult. If you look at the resources that are available in the European Union and in Japan to deal with all the meetings, with all the procedures, then turning into a trilateral event sounds good, very tempting. And we always expand to trilateral, configurations. But doing this in practice, I think, is very difficult. Right? Already, if you look at the nitty-gritty business, and I finish, of EU-Japan cooperation on an institution level, it is very, very, very complicated. And we are more digital now. We are used to communicate over the web, and we don't have to meet each other all the time. But turning this into a trilateral, full-fledged relationship, sounds good, but it's probably bureaucratically and administratively fairly difficult. It's a good idea. Very much. I take that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Axel. Thank you very much to our great panelists for joining us today with very interesting comments and discussion points. And thank you very much to all the audience. And I would now hand over the final word to Dr. Holtgren, please.
Yes, well, thank you all very much, Professor Ström and our distinguished speakers, for this inspiring discussion. And now we have unfortunately already reached the end of our program today, but I'm sure that there will be the opportunity to continue the discussion throughout the next year, and especially during the next EJAN conference in 2021. So at the end, please give me the opportunity for some more final remarks. First, I would like to draw your attention that the video of this event will stay on the Japanese-German Center Berlin's YouTube channel. So you can watch it once again if you would like to do so. And please also invite your colleagues who were not able to join us today to watch it later on. If I may also draw your attention to one more upcoming virtual event at the Japanese-German Center Berlin. So on Thursday and Friday next week, December 3rd and 4th, the JDZB, in cooperation with the German Federal Foreign Office, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and the Japan Institute of International Affairs, will host a 2-day virtual symposium on the topic of nuclear disarmament, arms control, and non-proliferation, German and Japanese perspectives ahead of the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, which will be opened with a keynote speech by the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Ms. Nakamitsu. If you would like to participate during this upcoming event, we kindly ask you to register urgently via our website, because the deadline is today at midnight Central European Time. And now, to officially close the event, I would like to thank all of you once again very much, our distinguished speakers, the chair, Professor Ström. I do thank very much our cooperation partners, Professor Söderberg and Professor Blechinger-Talcott. It was a great... It was a great pleasure, and I sincerely hope that the Japanese-German Center Berlin can also work together with you in the future. And last but not least, I would like to thank our virtual audience for participation. Thank you very much. Have a good evening in Japan, a good afternoon in Europe, and goodbye from the virtual Japanese-German Center Berlin.